Hey guys, Scuba Steve here on a very lazy Saturday morning. Talking about John 6 this week. I want to do something probably a little different than the way you might have ever approached this. We know what John's rendition here of what Jesus had to say when he fed the 5,000 in John 6, and most of us have heard it many times. If you haven't, or even if you have, go back and read it for yourself. Specifically, I want to look at what the people who see these signs in Jesus, and they're all there to hear Jesus, and they're all excited about Jesus. I want to really look at what it is that they have to say. In John 6, it starts that sometime after this, Jesus crossed over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd of people followed him. They had seen miraculous signs he had done on those who were sick. Clearly, people believing he was capable of doing amazing things. Jesus looked up and saw a large crowd coming towards him and says to Philip, we need to feed them, we need to get some bread and feed them. Philip responds that it's impossible, that all they have is a boy with 5 small loaves of barley bread and 2 small fish, and how far would that go, trying to feed everybody? First of all, 5,000 people walk out of the side of a mountain to hear somebody preach. Somebody packed a lunch. No one was sharing. No one was pulling out what they had because they didn't trust Jesus. The one who did was the child who, with his childlike faith, trusted and gave it. Jesus tells them to take it, and he blesses it. The apostles then go and they feed the first group of people, and they pick up the scraps. And at this point, they had to realize with the first group of people that there were more scraps than what they had to begin with. So they essentially take a sack lunch, one apostle, because there wouldn't have been 12 of them carrying it. And he goes to the first group, he feeds them, and now he's carrying more to the second group. And as he puts it down, and he feeds this other little group, and they pick up the scraps, and now they need a basket because there's so much. So we're still probably at 1, maybe 2 apostles walking around into the next group. 5,000 people eat like this, and they go around to each of the groups, and gather the pieces. By the end of it, they've gathered 12 baskets. There are 12 apostles. The people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did and began to say, this is the prophet who's supposed to come into the world. We believe because of this incredible thing that we've seen. Then the next one is something really cool. I want to specifically look at what the apostles did in verse 17. There they got into a boat and headed across the lake toward Capernaum. By now it was dark and Jesus had not yet joined them. Now Jesus walks out on the water with them. And as soon as he gets there, they're immediately at the other side. But I want us to really look at is that they left Jesus and the 5,000, got in a boat, went to the other side of the lake. They started out carrying a little bit of food. By the end of it, they're carrying around 12 giant baskets of leftovers. We don't even know if they had time to eat themselves. They've been working, they've been serving. They're overworked. And they make a mistake because they're overworked, because they're serving too much. And their mistake is they move forward without Jesus. And they rode for 3 or 3.5 miles. That's what it says in the NIV. When Jesus came to them and they accepted him back into the boat, they were immediately where it was that they were supposed to be. Specifically, it says they agreed to take him into the boat. Right away, the boat reached the shore where they were heading. The instant that they realized they had moved ahead without Jesus, then they recognized that they were right where they were supposed to be. If you recognize that Jesus is with you right now, you're right where you're supposed to be as well. So they get to the other side. All the people come next morning, show up. Time for breakfast. We had a great lunch yesterday. And they said, Rabbi, when did you get here? What's for breakfast? And he, I'm not skipping Jesus out of trying to dishonor him. I'm skipping it because I really want to focus on what these people said. He says, basically, you don't want me. You want to eat. That's why you're here. You're only here because you want to eat. Read it yourself, starting in verse 26. It's pretty awesome, his response, especially if you realize that he's almost rude to them in the way because he's speaking truth into them. And so then they go, what does God want from us? What works does He want us to do? What do we have to do so we can eat? And Jesus says, believe in me. And they said, so in verse 30, they come up with a great idea. What miraculous sign will you give us? What will you do so we can see it and believe from you? I've got an idea. Here's a great miracle you could produce, Jesus. Long ago, our people ate the manna in the desert. It was written in the Scripture, the Lord gave them bread from heaven to eat. And Jesus tells them, Moses didn't give them the bread, your people. God gave them the bread, and now He's given you me. The bread that comes from heaven. You know, I'm that manna. And they say, oh, give us that bread now. You know, they're still looking for breakfast. And then He goes on and He says, you know, I'm the bread of life. And He goes on to reveal to them who He is, sort of in a bit of an enigma there. But the Jews began to complain to Jesus because He said, I'm the bread of life that comes down from heaven. So in 42, they realize they're not getting breakfast. And they say, isn't this Jesus, the son of Joseph? Like that one who had the 14-year-old mom who they weren't married? Don't we know his father and mother? How can we say now that He came down from heaven? And Jesus kind of busts on them and tells them, you don't get it because you don't get it, basically. Everybody say hi to my wife in the background coming in with groceries. So that's what we're looking at this week. And specifically, if you don't read anything else, read 55 and 56, because it tells us specifically who Jesus is, just as He told them. And He didn't care that many walked away that day, because He reached the ones who were searching for Him. Thank you guys, and I look forward to next week.